But yeah, so that's a bit the big number three for me, and like I said, I figured you could have picked that out. So I'm kind of curious to
Yeah.
know what your number three is now.
Yeah, well, yeah, I feel like I talk about my top three all the time, so this is not going to be very exciting. And I don't really have a way of tying it into anything from Knights of the Old Republic,
Damn,
unfortunately.
should have
Um,
planned that better.
yeah, sorry. But yeah, so when I was in high school, obviously that's when I was in kind of peak role playing game mode. The PlayStation had come out and they launched Final Fantasy VII. That's what I bought a PlayStation for because I had been a big RPG guy on the Super Nintendo, and oh my God, it's Final Fantasy VII. It's the next Final Fantasy. And as we all know, that ended up kind of being a genre. I don't even want to say genre redefining game. Final Fantasy VII is, I would say, arguably maybe one of the top five most influential video games of all time.
I would say so. Yeah.
It's definitely up there. But but kind of similar to what Paul and I have been saying about all of these like canonical games, like I like Final Fantasy VII well enough. Like it's fine. Like it's all right. I don't mind it. I've played through it a few times. It's definitely not anywhere near my favorite Final Fantasy. And I remember there was just a little bit of um, coming off of Final Fantasy VI for the Super Nintendo. I remember Final Fantasy VII felt like a little bit of a letdown.
Mm,
Because you only had three character parties, and the characters weren't really that like different from each other. You basically would just pick your party and then just equip the spells and abilities on them that you wanted.
yep.
And so you could kind of swap out. There weren't a lot of differentiation. Um, and the whole like uh, super much more sci-fi than a lot of the past Final Fantasies. And I was kind of just like, this is okay, but it's not exactly what I was hoping for. And then a little while after that, Square released Final Fantasy Tactics for the
Mm,
PlayStation. And I think a lot of people were just like, what? Who were big fans of Final Fantasy VII were like, oh boy, a new Final Fantasy. And then they bought it and were just like, what the hell is this? But for me, I was like, this is exactly what I want. This is like, for me, this is my next Final Fantasy game. Like, this
yep.
feels like what I wanted out of a follow up um, for Final Fantasy VI. Yeah, I was absolutely enamored with Final Fantasy Tactics, and still am. It's again a game that I replay regularly, not as much as some others because it's kind of long.
Right.
And I keep joking during my Let's Plays that like because you're always encouraging me to play like shorter games that we can you know get in more of an audience with their short attention spans. And I'm always like, I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna do the giant Final Fantasy Tactics Let's Play. It's like 1,000,000 hours long, 40
Exactly.
episodes or something, which I will at some point. Um, but yeah, it's just a game that I love. I hadn't played a lot of tactical games at that point. I didn't have much of a strategy or a tactical experience outside of, say, like some real-time strategy games like Warcraft. And I had played a lot of Ogre Battle, which was a game for the Super Nintendo, which was a game that I loved. And in a lot of ways, well, I found out later that essentially the team from Quest that had made Ogre Battle was basically the team that made Final Fantasy Tactics as well.
There you go.
So there's some carryover, but I just loved the Final Fantasy class system is still kind of my favorite role playing gameplay system of all time, and I think the Final Fantasy Tactics version is the best because you just have all of these characters and you've got dozens of different classic fantasy job classes that you can switch them to. You've got all sorts of abilities and things that you can mix and match. And then outside of the gameplay system, you have a narrative that is like
Yep.
is kind of a notoriously bad translation of Final Fantasy Tactics, but even with that, the story still bleeds through, and it is a like super dense, like medieval political thriller. Really, it's a very it's funny because all the characters are much more like cartoony and childlike looking than say
Right.
your Final Fantasy VII, but the story is way darker. I mean, there's like at least half a dozen just straight up murders, not like killed in battle, but like murders in that
Yep.
game.
Yeah, and it's the
Um,
only game I'm aware of that doesn't have the job class of like old man or something. Is that one?
no, you're thinking of that was the joke about Phantom Brave has the old
Oh,
man
okay. Damn.
class, old
Sorry.
man and old woman, where they're just it's just an old man. It's just old. His stats suck.
No.
No. Final Fantasy Tactics has the calculator, the mathematician.
Oh
job
yeah,
class.
yeah. Okay. Yeah. No, that was. I think I did play it a very little. I wasn't very good at that. But that was one of the big games that I really enjoyed watching you play, which is, any of us, anybody who knew us growing up, like that was my thing. Mike played games, I watched. Um,
Well, you're gonna get that Let's Play soon, so you can
yeah,
relive it again.
which is probably why, I actually am. I like to watch a bunch of stuff on Twitch these days because I still have that the desire. But yeah, that was one of the really fun games that I liked watching you play, and I think the big part of it was the class system. Like you said, you could
Yeah.
kind of change people around, and like you had the interesting one, like the calculator, and there was like was that the one like they had like the geomancer? There was like different like
Oh yeah, the
the
Geomancer.
different
Yep.
mancers that could have like different really cool spells, um and again, similar with the tactics front, you can kind of, the way the battles play out can be very different depending about how you go into them, where it's not like a straight RPG where it's just like it's your party, the boss's party, and you just go back and forth from turns. Like there's the map, and you actually have to go around and coordinate things, and it was just really cool.
Yeah, it's definitely the game that I had been a big RPG fan for a while, but it's definitely the game that solidified that I really like tactical games, like particularly tactical games as well.
Yeah.
I went back and replayed Ogre Battle, and I pined for Tactics Ogre for a long time, which in a lot of ways Final Fantasy Tactics is actually Tactics Ogre 2 more so than it is a Final Fantasy game.
Yep.
And then in college I played through the Shining Force games. A friend of mine keyed me into those.
Right.
So yeah, it's definitely one that kind of broadened my taste in RPGs. But yeah, it's a game that I very much love, and even despite its significant length, I go back and replay it pretty regularly.
I can't remember. Did they make 2 of those, or was that like an expansion or something?
They've made several, so yeah, I guess that's a good point. They made a Game Boy Advance sequel, which reviewed very well, but I feel like has since kind of fallen out of critical favor.
Is that like
People don't
Lionheart
like.
or something?
No, it is a little bit of like a kiddie game. It's like kids get sucked into a book where they become like mercenaries, this enchanted book.
Is that the
And it's a
snowball
little
fight
more.
in the beginning?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it has the snowball fight, which is awesome. I think the snowball fight is like one of the most fun ways of introducing or like, giving you that material in a very like distinctive creative way.
Yeah.
No, but you're thinking around that time, I guess it was a few years they tactics to the PlayStation. It wasn't a full-on remake, but it was kind of like an upgrade. Like you were saying, they added in a bunch of very attractive, actually, kind of watercolor cutscenes.
Mm-hmm.
They redid the translation in a more like Shakespearean style. They were kind of trying to tie it into, I think, Final Fantasy 12.
Okay. Yeah.
Because they're all kind of made by a lot of the same people. And they added in a few extra battles and some extra job classes and stuff. It's I would say the PSP version is probably the definitive version, even though I know there are people who hate the new translation because they feel it's too flowery, and there are people that complain that there was some slowdown on the PSP version, which I think it's a lot of that is overblown.
Yeah.
I think the new content and some of the cleaned up bits are probably worth it. The slight trade-off in efficiency of play.
Yeah. I will say I think that was the game I tried to download when I was looking for more tactics games to play on my iPad, because they have it there, and the game looked great, as you mentioned. Everything seemed a lot more cleaned up than I remembered.
Yeah.
But my iPad was way too slow for it, so it was just really, really choppy, and wasn't a great experience. So maybe I'll grab pick up a copy or try to find another way of getting it to play it again, because I think at this point in time my life, my patience will be a little bit more to be able to handle.
You've had children now, so you've been tested by fire.
Oh, I think that means I have less patience. It is one of those games I'd like to play through because I do enjoy the tactics games, which could be potentially a next segue into my next game, unless you have any more to say.
No, we can move on.
Cool. So my next game is not exactly a tactics game. There was one in the series, so I'm assuming.
Oh, I know where this is going.
Yeah. So I'm assuming Mikey knows exactly where this is going. So this game was pretty much my introduction, really, as like a aha moment in the RPG world. I had always, similar, and as Mike was talking when we were kids, very much felt like, oh no, this is the talking game, and didn't want to go through that. I just wanted the action, which is why Mike had RPGs and I had Street Fighter. But
also a good game.
It was. But yeah, so this game really jumped out at me. I'm not really sure why initially, but again, I guess my big thing is just lots and lots of stuff in games. And so this game had 108 characters.
Yes, yeah, 108.
And so if you're familiar with any games with 108 characters, you'll probably know this game. And I am probably going to butcher the pronunciation because I've heard it pronounced two ways. It's either Suikoden or Suikoden. And I don't think I can actually choose one of them specifically, because I really enjoyed all of them, and it's the only RPG series that I've actually played every single one of them and beat every single one of them, including the tactics game, which was by far the worst out of the series.
Yeah, which you finished one more than me then. I could not. Yeah. Well, I'll let you finish your little spiel.
Yeah, and actually, I'm at the last boss in Tierkris, which is the only one I haven't finished yet, which some people try to pretend like it didn't actually exist. But I'm on the last boss. I'm just trying to get one of the last duck characters, if I remember correctly. And so yeah, it was just really a really cool game. There's so many characters. It's had such an interesting storyline. Loved all the names, the differences, everything about the games. So like I said, I don't think I can particularly choose one of them because I think I have favorite parts of all of them. But the one I probably found the most fun to play was probably 3. Just because it was a little bit more forgiving than 1 and 2 were, and had a little bit more kind of ability for somebody younger who wasn't familiar with the pure RPG style to kind of play a little bit more. But yeah, no, I really just liked all of that type of part about them, to the point where I unfortunately missed the the pre-registration for the new game that the creators of Suikoden.
Yeah, I did too. Kicking myself about that one.
Yeah, so I will. Obviously, I don't have the chance of getting the pre-release or whatever you want to call it for that, but I will definitely be getting that next game, and hey, maybe it'll be on the channel at some point in time. But yeah, the Suikoden series is by far my favorite RPG of all time, and a series that I hold very dear, and will continue to kind of go through and probably play again more and more as I get older.
Yeah, that is another one that I figured you were going to have on your list, because it is a great series. Yeah, and it was one that I was really surprised that you, at the time, I remember that you were taken with, because that was, I think the way we were introduced to it was we were at the mall, and I just kind of impulse bought Suikoden 2,
Yeah.
um, which was potentially one of my most thrifty impulse buys, because it was like, it must have been right after the game came out, because I know that game had a notoriously low print run
Yeah.
and kind of disappeared off shelves very quickly, and quickly became one of the original PlayStation's like most expensive US releases,
Yep.
and was for a long time. I mean, it was a notoriously like $200-300 game on the secondhand market for a while. And yeah, and like you, I was totally blown away by it. And it does make a good transition from Final Fantasy Tactics, because I think in a lot of ways they're very similar with kind of the strategic bent. I mean, they all have their like strategy battles in
Yep.
them. And also in their like a lot of RPGs from that period and on continuing on to now, a lot of Japanese RPGs kind of devolve into like budget anime shenanigans.
Yep.
But the Suikoden series is one that always like really kind of gets into the nitty gritty of war, and there aren't really a lot of like straight up villains in the series either. Like the characters kind of shift and change over time and mature, and somebody who might be a hero in one game could turn up as a villain in another one just because of circumstances. Somebody
Yep.
who was a villain in one game could end up being an important character in one of the following games.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's really nuanced, and you really can empathize with a lot of the cast, and even with such a huge cast, the characters are all really memorable.
Yep.
And a lot of them do show up over the span of multiple games, and it's kind of fun to see them evolve and like what different places they wind up in.
Yep. Exactly. I think that's, as you mentioned, one of my other favorite parts about that is just the fact that you do have similar but different characters throughout the entire series and how they kind of play out, but kind of all intermingled together a little bit. And one of the other parts that I kind of liked about it is, like, with a lot of these RPGs and stuff, you're kind of like a lone team trying to defeat this, like big bad boss, whatever it may be.
Yeah.
But in this, as you mentioned, it's kind of like there's not really necessarily a definitive enemy or bad guy. It's just kind of like armies and different views on how things should be done. And the cool part is with build 108 characters, like you're building an army, and so you have to go recruit a strategist, you have to recruit like a general, and it's really just kind of cool how you can do that and go and learn like the stories of all the different people.
Yeah.
And one of the other things I will say is one of my favorite characters in the entire game series is Apple, the like the apprentice to the strategist, or I think she becomes the strategist at one point in one of the games. So much so that I wanted, for like the longest time, I wanted to name my first daughter Apple. Well, lo and behold, I have a daughter now. Her name is not Apple. That got vetoed really quick. So,
and that's that. Yeah, I a lot of people had a really negative reaction to that, and I thought that was all right. I don't know. It's
yeah. I think it's a mix between the fact that it's like a fruit, and Gwyneth Paltrow already did that, and then you got kind of stuck in. Yeah, her daughter's name's Apple, who I just saw in a news feed on Facebook. Apparently, she's 18 and just graduated college. How the hell time flies.
Graduated college?
Sorry, not college, high school.
Oh, okay. I was gonna say she's like a genius or something too.
Yeah. But
just like the character from Suikoden.
Exactly.
Should have named her that, and then she'd be graduating college at 18.
But yeah, so there's so many intricacies of the game series and so many cool pieces of it and aspects and characters that if anybody watching this has not played it, I know Mike said the games are fairly expensive. I think some of them are a little bit more on the cheaper side, probably Tactics. Uh, but
A lot of them are available digitally now too.
okay.
That's I know two is that was one of the things that like kind of like Rondo of Blood, the Castlevania game that was super
Mhm.
expensive for a long time. I know people were kind of applauding when Suikoden 2 wound up on a lot of the download services.
Gotcha. Yeah. So if you haven't played these games, definitely try to pick one up and try one out. Um, I don't really know which one I'd recommend to start with. It's really hard to say. Like I said, I think 3 for me was kind of the introduction. Made it a little bit easier to play for some folks if you're not as familiar with the more hardcore RPG um, intricacies. But definitely 1, 2, and 3 are worthwhile.
Yeah, 4 is not great.
Yeah, 4
5 is okay though.
Yeah,
5 is okay.
4 and Tactics aren't so good. 5 is decent. I think 1 and 2 were very similar as a whole to like each other, so I think those are pretty solid. And then 3 was like kind of a twist on how that classic style came about, or that classic style worked, where you kind of had like 3 main characters, which was pretty cool, and you kind of shifted storylines across the board over time, and then eventually kind of meet up. But I will have to say, oh, go ahead.
Oh no, I wasn't gonna say anything.
Oh, okay. I was gonna say one last thing, and then we can move on to yours. My absolute favorite moment in the entire series was a moment in 3, and so as Mike was mentioning, there's like these big battle type battles that occur in each one of the game series, and each one is slightly different from the last. So in the first one, it's all like these little tiny little army characters jumping around, and you can choose like attack, defend, or like arrows or something, and they kind of go back and forth, and there's different styles to that like battle. But in 3, they had a different setup, which was more like I forget what the heck it's called, but it's like a line chart kind of thing, where there's like different points on lines, and you can move parties to those different points. And you could choose like your party, and it had 3 people, but it was like kind of like a normal battle, but not exactly. And you probably remember where I'm going with this. And there's this one character in the game, which is just kind of out of the blue. You just kind of find him in a town, and his name was Augustine. He was like the 3 Musketeers.
He was kind of the foppish dandy character.
Yeah. He was kind of like he kind of had like that 3 Musketeers look.
Yeah.
He had like the saber and sorry, the rapier and such, and he had like the rose was like his thing. I don't know if it was a glitch in the game, but any party that he was in any of the battles, he never died. Like everybody else in his party would die.
Yeah.
He could never die, to the point where I believe there was one battle where all my parties had died except for his, and he was the only one standing, and he took out all of the enemies that were remained by himself.
Yeah, that happened for me too. Like, and he was like under leveled because I hadn't really been using him at all, and it was just something about. I do think it was probably. It might not have been an explicit glitch, but I think it was something like they didn't quite realize that combining, like he had a piece of equipment that you couldn't take off, I think.
Yeah.
And combining that with like a few other pieces of equipment gave him like a ludicrously high evade ability.
Yep.
And so he would just like dodge and counter everything.
Right.
So even though he was like way under leveled, he would just Ginsu his way through other enemy battalions. Yeah, it happened for me too. So it was definitely like something in the game.
Yeah, and it was just one of the most memorable moments, in that game of like any other part through the entire series. Like that's one of the few moments that I remember very clear. And it was just one of those things where I remember one of the battles that he was in. Everybody else was dead. It was just him trying to fight. And it was the enemy's turn, and each one of them attacked, and he dodged and then countered, and in the counter killed the guy who attacked him.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was pretty great. So
yeah, it's a good series. The first 3 games kind of make a trilogy of sorts. There's like a couple of characters whose stories play out over the span of those 3 games. So
yeah,
I would definitely recommend those first three. The first one, it looks a little rough. It's a very early PlayStation game, and I've even heard some rumors that it was originally supposed to be like a Super Nintendo game that got kind of dumped on the PlayStation at the last second. It's a little rough. It's very short though. I think the first game is something like, for an RPG anyways, it's like 15 hours or.
Oh wow.
Yeah, you can definitely finish that one pretty quick. The second and third games are quite a bit longer.
Yep.
Well, I'm not gonna upset the RPG cart. I don't think we're gonna. This is a very RPG heavy series of lists, and I think it will surprise no one, because I even mentioned in my last listing how Final Fantasy VII was a bit of a disappointment coming off of Final Fantasy VI.
Yeah.
And that would be because Final Fantasy VI is probably my second most favorite game of all time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that won't surprise anybody, since it was the first Let's Play that I started on the channel. It was very long. I talked about it a lot, kind of an encyclopedic knowledge of the game. You know, I had talked a little bit when we were talking about Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past, how that was like the first game that got me really into more RPG adventure type games. And definitely, like, I loved Link to the Past, I loved The Secret of Mana, I loved a number of other RPGs that I played, but Final Fantasy VI was the game that really like solidified that for me. Like, that I had really enjoyed all of the games that came before that, but when I played Final Fantasy VI, it was like, this is what I want, like, going forward out of my RPGs. Like, I want them to be just like this.
Yep.
Again, I did a Let's Play on it, so you can just go watch all those. But it's in a similar way to what I said about when Paul was talking about Knights of the Old Republic. Like, it's got a lot of depth to it, but it's also fairly breezy.
Mm-hmm.
You get a lot of characters that join you, all who have very disparate abilities. It doesn't explicitly use the job system in the same way that Tactics does or Final Fantasy V does, but each of your characters have kind of their built-in jobs, and then you have these like pieces of equipment that you can give them to kind of tweak things a little bit. So it does have some of that kind of job modification feel to it. And there aren't really, well, there's maybe one or two stinker characters, but like most of them are very useful. And even though some of them, like, because there's such a huge cast, really don't factor into the plot a whole lot,
Right.
They're each given like just enough characterization that you know who they are, you know what their motivations are, and like, and some of it is the design to not Kiratorian, that's the Dragon Ball guy.
Very different.
Oh god, I'm gonna forget his name. I'm totally blanking on the longtime Final Fantasy artist's name, but he has this very ephemeral, like, dreamlike style to his artwork, and he crams in a lot of little details into a small amount of space.
Yoshikata Amano?
Wow, what?
Yoshikata Amano?
Oh yeah, Yoshitaka Amano. Yeah,
okay,
that's him. Yeah. we gotta get you a pronunciation aid.
Yeah, I'm not very good at those.
Yeah, Yoshitaka Amano, who actually got his start doing design work for the Tatsunoko animation studio, doing like the Eagle Force and Speed Racer and that kind of stuff. But anyway, it's like the perfect length for an RPG too. Like, it's just long enough that it's got a lot of depth, and then you're done. Like, you're not sinking hundreds of hours into this. There's not a lot of waste. Again, it's a cartridge game, so they couldn't really afford to waste space.
Right.
And the design work is just so rich. Like, all of the sprite work is, I would say, next to Chrono Trigger, which is the Super Nintendo's kind of other big RPG. It has the richest sprite work of any US released game. There's just so much detail. And it never gets boring either. There's always like all these weird little side things to do. Everybody talks about the opera house and that. But there's also like the auction house that you can do.
Yeah.
There's a few little like first person sections. There's the ghost train at the beginning, which is a super fun bit. I'm probably going to pull my footage from that episode.
I was going to say, I think you have some good footage.
Yeah, the ghost train is pretty great. There's a few like multi-party battles. I know when I was a kid, I would always just like focus on my favorite characters and ignore everybody else. But now when I go back and replay, I try to level everybody else up. And I used to hate when I was a kid. I hated the multi-party battle sections because I was like, now I have to use all these characters that suck.
Yeah.
Where now it's like I love building like the perfect parties and trying to find like a balance where their skills all complement each other. That's like one of my favorite parts of the game.
That game was again similar to Taxes. It was another game I enjoyed watching you play, and I did play that a little, but not very far. I think I got past like the lock and terror encampment scene towards the beginning.
Yeah, it's real early on.
Yeah, I don't think I got very far. But that game also has a great soundtrack, I find.
Yes.
And it's one of my favorites, to the point where like hearing that music and then getting what was it, the Black Mages, the band that did like the Final Fantasy music and like rock style. It like takes me back, and just remembering those days where you just like huddle down in front of the TV in the basement, playing that game and just being really excited about everything.
Well, the Black Mages, that's Nobuo Uematsu, the guy who did all the soundtracks for the earlier Final Fantasy games. That's like his band. So they did on the Game Boy. That was a Super Nintendo game, and for the Game Boy Advance, they did ports of all of the 16-bit Final Fantasy games.
Mm-hmm.
And as much as I know some people complain about the audio taking a hit for the Game Boy Advance versions, which they do, and it's a kind of a shame because the soundtrack's so great. But I do kind of think of the Game Boy Advance versions of those three as like the definitive versions, because they added in a lot of extra content.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, in Final Fantasy IV, they actually let you change your end game party. Normally in that game, you're ending the game with a very specific party.
Right.
But you can they let you switch out any of the surviving characters, so you can put in a number of other different characters. And then there's also a huge post-game dungeon where you can kind of get a little bit of closure to the story arcs of all the characters that might not have quite gotten it. You can get some like beefed up weapons for everybody.
Yep.
And then for Final Fantasy V, they added in a bunch more job classes, and they added in again another big post-game dungeon that you could do.
Now, were these added in like the adding in Jabba the Hutt to like the Star Wars movies? Like they were just things we thought of afterwards, or were these things that were supposed to be in the game but were cut or something like that?
Well, it wasn't like Jabba the Hutt, because they didn't feel, for the most part, like janky and out of place. No, I think they were new. They were new content. Some of it might have been. There might have been a little bit of cut content, but I think a lot of it was just added in stuff. And so I was all excited with Final Fantasy VI, because I was like, oh boy, what are they gonna? This is my favorite one, and they added so much to these other games. What are they gonna add to this one? Like new characters? Gonna be new characters? Will there be like new areas you can go to? And they definitely added like the least amount of stuff to Final Fantasy VI. It was they added a couple extra materia, so basically like these one-shot summon spells and like one or two other magic spells that you could use, and then a big, complicated, like kind of crappy post-game dungeon that was filled with just like recolors of old bosses, or not even recolors, like the same boss, they just had like a different move set.
They probably did that because it was the best one out of the series, so they didn't have much to add.
it didn't. I mean, I'll say that was probably the case. Sure, that's there wasn't as much. It was a much denser game. It would have been harder. And yeah, I would agree. It would have been a little bit harder for them to fit certain things in, I think.
Yeah. And I will say one last thing, though, in terms of my commentary on this game is that it also had my favorite Final Fantasy character of all time, which, no, was not a Moogle. Which I believe was Mog in that game, right?
Well, there are Moogle characters, but the one that joins your party is Mog.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No. My favorite character in the Final Fantasy series is Setzer.
Oh, so you must love Kingdom Hearts 2 then.
Yeah, I have no idea.
Where Setzer shows up and you have to have a Nerf bat fight with him. It's really embarrassing for everybody involved.
God. Yeah. No. That sounds terrible.
Yeah, it's really stupid.
Yeah. I'm not really sure.
He was one of the characters that was designed by the guy that created the Kingdom Hearts series.
Okay.
He wanted to bring him in.
God, he couldn't have picked a better way.
It's a very distinguished Nerf bat fight.
I suppose, yeah. Now, I don't really remember why he's my favorite. I always liked this, like his kind of the rebel attitude, rogue gambler guy. But I don't know.
Yeah, he's definitely one that I usually sideline fairly early on in the game. And don't go back to.
Yeah, I don't think he was a very good character in the game. I just always liked, just his personalities and such.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, he's kind of one of the designated badasses.
Right.
Him and Shadow, who was also designed by the guy that that created Kingdom Hearts.
Was he
also escaping me?
Was he also in the Nerf battle?
No, Shadow does not make an appearance. Probably because like Setzer is a roguish gambler, but like Shadow is a straight up murderer. It's a little hard to they couldn't figure out a way to tactfully write the scene where he just like shanks Mickey Mouse.
Didn't you tell me at one point like they killed Goofy?
Oh man, we're really going off track with this. But yeah, there's a scene in Kingdom Hearts 2 where, like, spoilers, there's like this huge battle, and it's standard Kingdom Hearts nonsense. There's like this huge battle, and it's interspersed periodically with cutscenes. And at one point, there's a cutscene where it's Goofy, Sora, the main kid Sora, Goofy, Donald, Sora, and Mickey, and they're like kind of in a break from the battle, and they're like, oh geez, we gotta do. And then there's like this explosion in the background, and like off in the distance, and like a piece of shrapnel just flies out and like hits Goofy in the head and like knocks him down, and everyone's like, oh Goofy, you okay? And he just like doesn't get up, and they're like, Goofy? And he's just there on the ground, like, eyes closed, tongue out. And everyone's like, oh my God, Goofy's dead. And I was like, whoa, wait, what? Goofy just got killed, like, during a war by a piece of shrapnel? This is like Saving Private Ryan kind of stuff. Like, what the hell is going on? And then, like, everyone's like, no, Goofy! And like Mickey, Sora, and Donald all just like go berserk, and that's their way of like, they just, go Super Saiyan and just start crashing through all the enemies. And so they like obliterate everyone, and they're just like, oh, we did it, we won the battle, but it won't bring Goofy back. And everyone's like, oh. And then he just like walks in from off scene, and he's like, oh, hey, I wasn't dead. And they're like, oh, Goofy, you're back. And then they just move on and just don't acknowledge that at all. And it's like, did you not check? Like, what is going on?
They're not.
That's why Kingdom Hearts 2 is my number one pick for this.
Oh God, the only thing I can hope is like when he gets hit with that piece of shrapnel, he just does that classic Goofy falling off a cliff yell. Yeah. Oh God, yeah, we got way sidetracked on that one.
Yeah. All right, move on. We've been going for this is gonna be a nightmare to edit.
Yeah, no, this, yeah, you have fun with that.
Thanks.
So like, I think you can probably guess my number one favorite game at this point, based off of the other ones that I've said. So my number one favorite game is, although some of these other games like introduced me to, games that I've played here or there or got, into a little bit, and had a nostalgic value as I've gotten older. But this one game has basically been, up until the most almost the most recent release, has basically been part of my life, I guess you could say, that I played it quite often, which is the Halo series. Halo has been a huge part of my life to the point where I have like 3 of the Legendary Collection statues, and I actually have a picture of myself out at Microsoft headquarters with the giant Halo statues that they had in the lobby, which no, I'm not that nerdy. I didn't go out there just for that. I actually had an interview with Microsoft for a job.
You did, yeah. It was a job interview, I remember.
Yeah. So I just lucked out and was able to do that. And so yeah, it's just, which is funny because the actual Halo Combat Evolved, the first one that came out, was actually your game. And
Yep.
it was my uncle and aunt surprised us some Christmas buying both of us an Xbox, and we each got one game with it, and me being the Star Wars guy, I know you like Star Wars too, but I was very much into Star Wars at that time. I got the Star Wars game Obi-Wan, which was a
quality,
a terrible game, and you got Halo, and so it was, we got home later on, and I forget, was it just the two of us, or was Matt, our cousin, there as well? I think he was there.
He was around pretty regularly. So.
Yeah, so I think he was there, and so we hook up everything, and we start the game up and everything, and like it's starting to go through the the opening of everything, and the not the title, but like the company comes up that made it, Bungie, and I just like out of the blue, I'm just like, oh man, Bungie, and both my cousin Matt and Mike just look at me and like with like this, like, what are you, an idiot? And they're like, it's Bungie, and I was like, oh. So so my introduction to the series was me being an idiot and can't pronounce things or read, apparently. But it's basically been a game that I've loved since the beginning. I have every single Halo game that's come out. I have most like the Legendary Collections, as I mentioned. And it's been pretty much one of the few shooter games that I've really liked. And I had put it down towards the end because I'll be honest, 1, 2, and 3 were probably my favorites. And then the couple after that, ODST, Reach, etc., were decent. But then once Bungie handed off the reins to Microsoft, or at the time 343 Studios,
343, yeah.
which I think it's now 343 Industries or something, it just kind of got wacky and crappy, to be honest. So I actually
I've never played 5 because 4 was really bad.
Yeah, 4 wasn't very good. But I played that one all the way through, and then 5, I think I got halfway through, and I was just like, "What the hell is going on?" And I just I couldn't do it, and so I stopped playing it. And it was actually recently where a few friends of mine, the same ones I'm playing the Dark Souls 3 series with again, they're like, "Yo, you should try the new Halo." Yeah. Try the new multiplayer because it's free, and I was like, oh yeah, sure, I'll play it. And I hooked it up to the computer, and I got to download it for the computer, and I started playing it, and it was the first time actually that I've actually felt like back to those original days playing Halo. Like, yeah, this is my game. Like I was terrible in the beginning fighting against people, but then it was like next thing you know, I'm like headshotting at people with a pistol, doing like a 180, and like hitting someone with a sticky grenade behind me, and like all these cool badass moves that I used to be able to do back in the day. When we'd have like the actual we didn't have multiplayer as we have it now. We literally had two Xboxes on opposite sides of the room of my basement, with a hardwired cable between the two of them, and we had like
Yep.
16 player 8-on-8, or no, sorry, 8 player battles, 8-on-8, 4-on-4, with all like my friends and stuff for like parties. So it's pretty much one of one of my, well, it is my favorite game of all time, favorite series, and I think Combat Evolved being that kind of entrance into the series and getting really enthralled with it, is why it makes it my number one.
Yeah, it's the original Halo is definitely on my list of greatest games ever. I enjoyed it quite a bit as well. Like you said, I was the one that kind of brought it into the house because I had been at college, and a friend had an Xbox, and everyone got like super 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 into Halo. And I remember like it was a game that I really enjoyed, but it also like kind of seemed to be consuming everyone. Like it was one of those things where clearly I'm really into video games. I mean, I'm running the show with my brother now, and I've played hundreds of them over the years, but like I don't tend to get like really obsessed with any individual game, and like my friends in college would just play constantly. I mean, they would skip class to play. I never cut class to play a video game, Mom. Um, but and they would also we would sneak into the classroom building sometimes at night and network two of the Xboxes between the classrooms so we could play on the
Nice.
projector screens. Yeah. Yeah, I'm surprised we were able to get away with that. That nobody like locked up or like checked on anybody, but we weren't really doing anything. So,
Yeah.
um, but yeah, and it was like you wouldn't I wouldn't play with them for a couple days, and then I would try to like jump in, and everyone would be like 1,000 times better, and just like flying around and doing these precision cross the map pistol headshots and
Yep.
um but yeah, I always liked the first game a lot. I was a bit lukewarm on some of the others, although I know Paul and I have talked. My favorite's probably ODST because it's the weirdo one, and it does some kind of like bizarre things with the game structure. Um,
Yeah, that was a weird one.
yeah, yeah. No, I really like it though. I should replay that. I could do a let's play of that. That'd be
Yeah,
fun.
it's not too bad. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a quick game too.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, no, I do remember like I was the one that was kind of like it was my game, but I think you ultimately became a lot more into it.
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, like if I could turn my camera on now so everybody could see what's behind me, I have like 3 of the statues, like a remote controlled, car, and a bunch of other crap of Halo behind me. So
Send
I
me a
suppose.
picture, I can edit it in.
Well, there you go. Yeah, I suppose you could say I'm into it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I remember like that was also the early days it was Halo 2 was the multiplayer was when they had actual
Yes.
like online multiplayer.
Yep.
And I remember you had some like it was like very rudimentary online console multiplayer. It was you were behind the PCs, and I remember you told me some story where you were playing online and you were up like kind of late at night. Well, you were up late-ish. Our
Yeah.
mom is a big stickler on like everybody has to go to bed early.
I think it was
And
summertime too, so I had a little bit of leniency.
yeah, yeah, but she like came downstairs and like yelled at you like you have to go to bed, and like she yelled loud enough that everyone heard you over your headset.
Yep.
And that was like before you could kind of um curate who could or could not hear you speak and who you could or could not hear.
Yep.
And so just like all these strangers in the game like heard mom yell at you, and they were like, he's gotta go to bed.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that was probably one of my my least favorite moments in the Halo, my Halo career. For sure, yeah. But I would say, on the contrary to that, one of my favorite moments in my Halo career was I actually somehow, I don't even know how the heck I figured this out, but me and another friend of mine at the time were like huge into Halo. We played all the time, and him and I were playing one night, and we actually got synced up with some of the testers who actually tested the whatever, I forget, I think it was Halo 2 or 3, whichever one we were playing at the time. We actually got synced up with them and started playing a couple matches with them, and holy crap were they good. Like, I thought I was good, but like they were just incredible. And it was really, really cool to be able to play with them and even talk to them a little bit through the chat. But they were not forgiving.
No, I wouldn't think so. If your job is to play Halo, you're probably going to be pretty good at it.
Yeah. So yeah, it was pretty crazy, and Halo's been a great, great part of my life, I would say. Like I said, to the point where I still have deal with it today, or not today, but like in this day and age. I grabbed one of the most recent statues the past couple months from a yard sale, and so that was pretty cool. But
nice.
Yeah. So the one other story I'll quickly mention, and then we'll jump to yours to try to wrap up before it gets too crazy. It was that growing up in high school, I was kind of like on the nerdy side of things.
No.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, who would think? Yeah, I wasn't.
Says the host of a video game YouTube show.
But yeah, no, I was more on the nerdy side and did decently in school, but I was kind of I was still friends with some of the the jocks and the other people who were more sports, played sports and were more popular and things. Like it wasn't the classic hate relationship you see in the movies. And so one of the things that our school did for seniors was at the end of the year, you had the opportunity to be locked in the school for an evening, and they brought in all sorts of fun activities for you to be able to play, which you mentioned that jokingly, the Nerf sword fight thing. I got to do the it wasn't Nerf, it was the inflatable jousting sticks, and I got to do that with Mrs. Holt, which was hilarious. But yeah, so one of the other things that they did was they brought in all the TVs that they used to use for those terrible in-classroom movies on the VCRs and everything, and a bunch of people brought in their Xboxes. I'm assuming it was the Xbox 360s maybe, or the original, I forget, whatever the time period that was when they came out, and we all linked them all together, and we ended up having an all-out battle, because apparently all the sports players also thought that they were really good at Halo and that they'd been playing as friends, and so we played the jocks against the nerds, and we wiped the floor with them. Absolutely wiped the floor with them, and it was pretty hilarious afterwards. They were all just, they're not used to losing, obviously, as being jocks, and it was very funny to see all of us wipe the floor with these guys. And yeah, that was pretty much the best moment of my high school career. No, I'm just kidding.
Best moment of your life.
That's true.
It's all been downhill since then.
True. Then I got into World of Warcraft, and yeah, it was.
Oh god.
Yeah. As you noticed, that was not in the top 5.
Yeah, I'm glad that wasn't your top 5.
So yeah, I'll have to send you a picture of my background and stuff here, so you can throw that in there or something. But yeah, Halo is definitely my top favorite game of all time, and probably will continue to be as long as they continue making them. And maybe one day I'll be able to work for them so that they stop making crappy Halos. And hopefully
you're like Obi-Wan, you're the only hope.
Exactly. And hopefully they don't listen to this podcast to hear me tell them that their games are crappy.
Well, don't worry. We'll probably only get watched by 3 people, so I don't think one of them will be the CEO of 343 Industries.
Probably not. Oh, and actually, one random name plug is I actually am friends with somebody now who works at Bungie, but obviously they don't make Halo anymore, so I guess all him and I talk about is Destiny, which is much less cool.
Well, I guess that leaves it to me to wrap up with my number 1 pick.
The moment has come.
I think this will surprise no one, because I've also done a Let's Play of this game on the channels. But yes, it's The Sims busting out. That's that crappy like Sims DS game where it's not really The Sims. You
Oh,
have
yeah.
to pick like 4 pre-designed characters.
Exactly.
I mean, I have put an ungodly amount of time into The Sims. Probably, if we're going by pure hour input, then The Sims would be quite high on my list. But um, no, it is Castlevania Symphony of the Night.
Man, great jazz music at the end.
Yeah, I did talk about I've talked about that on a couple of episodes. The "I Am the Wind" song. I think I am getting a bit of Stockholm syndrome because like I've had that come up on my playlist a few times, and I was like, this isn't that bad.
I know Billy loved it.
Yeah, yeah. So and it's funny because I enjoyed the Castlevania games on on the Nintendo Entertainment System, the NES. I own Super Castlevania 4 for the Super Nintendo, and I liked that well enough. But I was never like a huge Castlevania guy. And I remember Symphony of the Night came out for the PlayStation, and I was like, oh, that looks, it looks cool, I guess.
Hmm.
And I think, because we were still kids, we were living at home. I kind of arbitrarily put that on my Christmas list for our parents. And the nice thing, I do a little bit of my like old man nostalgia plugging. Like I do kind of miss the era of the PlayStation uh, because games were on CDs, so which were super cheap to make.
Yep.
And so like retail release was like $40, and people took a lot, like it was games were just a lot more cheap and easy to come by.
Right.
Even mainstream releases. So I think my parents just kind of arbitrarily grabbed that in a stack of PlayStation games they were getting us for Christmas. And I was like, oh cool, this is fun. And I popped it in at some point, either Christmas Day or the next day, and I started playing, and it just like instantly absorbed me. I had played the game's clearly heavily influenced by Super Metroid. I know Koji Igarashi, he wasn't the lead designer at the time, but he was the guy who kind of after Symphony became like the steward of the Castlevania series. And I know he's talked about it was really more inspired by Zelda 2, but man, I mean, it rips off the Super Metroid map just verbatim. It's clearly structured in the same way. But I was just totally absorbed with the gothic style and the it was a side-scrolling kind of action RPG.
Yep.
The way that you had to explore to find new abilities, and then those abilities would open up more parts of the castle, and then there was the like kind of twist halfway through where if you did things the right way, you opened up like another whole separate castle.
They did a lot of just repeating the same thing all over again.
Yeah, it's the upside down castle, but it's
Right.
like, oh my god, now there's a whole other area with all new bosses and all new items, and like, yeah, it's the same castle, but it functions very differently when everything's flipped.
True.
And yeah, I mean the second castle goes a lot faster than the first because you can just kind of blast through it, but and just like the super detailed, like kind of beautifully grotesque sprite art, which I mean, I know they ripped off a number of sprites from Rondo of Blood, the one that didn't come out in the US at the time. Yeah. But like the Symphony of the Night sprites hung around for a long time. You would see those popping up in a lot of other Castlevania games over the next few years.
Yep.
Yeah, it was just, I mean, again, I've done a Let's Play on it, so if you want a real detailed, thorough breakdown, you can go watch those couple episodes. But yeah. Even with the janky voice acting and kind of doofy story, it just really, I mean, and I beat it in like 2 days. But it's the game that I definitely replay the most because I enjoy it so much and it goes so quickly, which is also probably why I did the Let's Play of it. Yeah, it was just one of those ones that kind of came out of the blue, and then I've been a diehard Castlevania fan ever since then. They've come out with a lot of other good Castlevanias. Some of them have quite lived up to Symphony.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that was my first introduction to Castlevania. Um, Actually, was it that or was it the terrible N64 one? I forget. But either way, that was my first like real introduction to Castlevania, and um, I don't really think I've ever played any of them very much through. I played the Symphony of the Night after you beat it, so I could play as Richter.
Oh, which
Um,
is like the super hard mode.
oh yeah, it was awful. I could not get very far, and so I don't think I've really played any of the Castlevania games other than one of the um, Game Boy Advance or DS ones. Um, that I got
Yeah, you
decent.
borrowed one from me and then it disappeared.
I think it's
To-
still in my Game Boy Advance someplace. Um, but yeah, so I played those really. I only played really one of them, but I've really kind of been obsessed with Castlevania in general, like just like the story and everything about it.
well,
Um,
yeah, your username is like usually some kind of Castlevania character.
exactly. I have two of the amiibos sitting right in front of me now, Richter and Simon. Um, I have the Trevor statue that I got from when the TV show came out, the Netflix one. So yeah, no, it was really cool. Like I enjoy that game and other people playing it. And I definitely can see like the how that was kind of a revolutionary turn for you in your Castlevania um, your Castlevania playthroughs, because the other ones up until that point hadn't really hadn't really gotten to that like excitingness of like the interestingness that you were looking for, and then like that one was like perfect, and then other ones from that point have been similar but just haven't quite hit that mark yet. So yeah, I can definitely see that for being your number one.
Yeah, there's a richness to Symphony's design where there's just always some other little secret, some other little detail. And I think, similar to you saying how a lot of your favorite games have like a richness of content, that's kind of what I feel with a lot of mine too. Like they're games that really reward replays.
Hmm.
You're always kind of discovering some new little detail. And considering like Symphony is not a super big game, and that like I'm still finding new stuff when I replay that, um, you know, decades later, that's really saying something.
Yeah, yeah, and I think as I mentioned, I think about Final Fantasy VI. You were mentioning the soundtrack's really good in Symphony of the Night. I know we're joking about the song at the end, but that was all just from that one moment with Billy.
Yeah, it's got some of the best variations of the classic Castlevania themes in that version.
Exactly.
And the incident Paul is mentioning is my best friend in childhood. I would always go over to his house the day after Christmas, so I brought Symphony over and I beat it at his house. And then the like kind of cheesy jazz finale started, and we actually got into like a physical altercation because he wanted to turn off the system so bad. And I was like, "No, we got to see the credits. Got to see the post game."
Oh god, he hated that jazz music.
Yeah,
But
it's not a bad song.
but yeah, no, it's definitely and it kind of, as you mentioned, was kind of from Metroid, but after that, this had that Metroidvania crossover of style of play, and there's been a lot of games that have utilized that same schema and such, and it's not much has lived up to it. I mean, even Blasphemous, that I've been trying to do my Let's Play through and been terrible.
Someday.
Haven't got back to yet, but it has that similar style.
Yeah.
And going through, you can level up your weapons, you can use different weapons. There's still kind of like an RPG-ish storyline to it, and there's really cool detailed bosses, and
well, even something like Dark Souls, you could argue, takes a lot of its inspiration from that series.
yeah.
And Symphony in particular, because its Dark Souls games are all kind of these interconnected worlds, and you need to find new abilities and key. It's usually keys, but sometimes it's abilities to open up new pathways.
Right.
And definitely, like, Symphony was clearly heavily inspired by Metroid, but now I would say that a lot of the games coming out that use that same style are definitely riffing off of Symphony more than they are Metroid.
Right. Yep. Yeah, no, I would second that. And having really not played any of the Metroid games or any of the Castlevania games, I definitely will lean on you for that. But I can the crossover I've heard in a lot of the streams and stuff that I've watched is the the Metroidvania games, just like the Dark Souls series and all the other ones have like this key representation and fan base to them that's just like unwavering.
Yeah.
So yeah, well,
right.
I'm sure you'll throw your videos and random things in for that. But before we wrap up, I just want to quickly run through my 3 honorable mentions that we won't actually talk through exactly, but I think you'll enjoy hearing what they are because some of them are interesting. So 3 quick honorable mentions from my side here is this one probably won't be a surprise to you, but the Uncharted series. It's a series that I know we've talked about in the past before. Our very first video kind of was actually Uncharted, and so it's a new style of game that I started playing, and I really got into the series. So the first one was one of my favorites, just kind of introducing to me that style and Nathan Drake and the whole series as a whole. So I enjoyed that. I know you have a certain feeling towards those games.
I've played all those games. I kind of hate them, but I
don't know. It's the Prince of Persia, God of War, like those style that it's just kind of it's kind of an easy, like you don't have to worry about just dying all the time. I tend to play them on easy just because I enjoy that funness of them versus
they're popcorn games.
Yeah. So won't get too much into that. Well, my hope is to eventually get back to that Uncharted game and actually do some more videos with it for the series. Maybe a let's play of continuing from that initial video on. But my number 2 honorable mention, which is a big throwback, but we were just talking about it the other day, kind of, is Twisted Metal 2. It is a weird
cart combat.
Yeah, it's a very strange style game that I feel like has kind of only really been the Twisted Metal series. Like no other series has really done something similar. And 2 was by far my favorite because 1 was kind of proving the concept, and then 2 was really kind of building upon it and having like a real story and going through a lot more fun. So it was a game that I played very much with my cousin, who's like basically my best friend growing up, because we lived right down the street from each other and we're always over each other's houses during the summer. And Twisted Metal was one of those really fun games that we used to play. So 2 is an honorable mention for me. And then 3, and the last one here, is a game that both you and I have played, Mike, and I think we have strong feelings for, but it's kind of an oddity. Is the original Magic the Gathering PC game that was released in 1997.
It's a weird game, but it's not bad.
Yeah. I mean, both of us have a history with Magic the Gathering as the card game and such growing up. But the original PC game is unlike the ones that we play today, and I've tried a couple of them. It had like the classic deck builder, you could play against other people, but there was also like this very weird story mode to it that I never beat or anything, but it was really fun and unique. So I hold that as an honorable mention because it's just kind of one of those weird games that I won't forget.
Well, I'll throw out 3 real quick ones because I'm old and I'm rapidly falling asleep because it's late.
It's only 2 in the afternoon.
My I'm very old. My honorable mentions will be Super Metroid, Mega Man 2, and Earthbound. I would highly recommend all 3 of those games.
We might get an Earthbound Let's Play. I've heard rumbles of.
That's definitely gonna happen.
Awesome.
Definitely gonna happen.
Another one of the fun ones I like to watch. I watched you play, so yeah. Awesome. Well, yeah. Before it gets too late, and before we take too much longer here, I think we should definitely wrap it up here.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for joining us all down this trip down memory lane. I'm almost certainly going to break this up into 2 separate episodes, but that'll work. So yeah, thanks for joining us. Hopefully you'll keep us company for another year of fun in Team Brothership. But until then, I've been Mike.
And I've been Paul.
And we will see you real soon. Have a great week, everybody.
See you, everybody.